Hi, my name's Mel and welcome back to Bookish Brummy. So today we're having another Stephen King video and I'm going to do another summary of a Stephen King book that I've read that I've really enjoyed. So I thought it would be quite apt to do Cujo today. So Cujo was written in 1981 and it's one of Stephen King's first books. And the reason why I want to cover this one specifically before October is over is because I've read about 25 Stephen King books now, and I've read some of the ones that are supposed to be the scariest, like Salem's Lot, Carrie, Pet Sematary, It, and also The Shining. Now, I've never actually read The Shining, but I've read the others, and they're supposed to be some of the scariest books that Stephen King has written, and none of them have actually scared me. So I can't talk about The Shining. When I get to read that, I'll let you know if that one ups my fear factor. But Cujo is the only one I've read so far where I've been heart pounding, on the edge of my seat thinking, oh my word, what's going to happen? And I feel like I could really put myself into the characters' positions and feel the fear that they probably felt during this novel. So as we're in spooky season and Halloween is this week in a couple of days, I thought it best that I talk about one that's actually scared me. So I say this in at the start of all of my summary videos. When I do a summary rather than a review, and this is going to be a summary, I talk about the plot in depth and I also talk about the ending of the novel. So if you haven't read this book and you sort of want to, this might not be the right video for you to watch right now, so maybe come back and watch it after you've read the book. These videos are kind of meant to be, if you want to talk about a book after you've read it and then you go and talk to somebody else who's also read the book and both of you know what the plot line is and what's going on, and then you can have that kind of discussion. That's what these summary videos are kind of meant to mimic. So it's a bit like, if somebody's just read a Stephen King book and it's blown their mind and they want to go and have a conversation, then maybe one of my videos I'm also talking about that video, and that might sort of help, and you can join in the conversation in the bottom box in the comments. So as I say, Cujo is one of the earlier books set in 1981 and it's set in Castle Rock, Maine. Now, interestingly, this book, I thought Cujo was a standalone novel. And it is a standalone novel in its own right, but there's a couple of other books around it that may be of interest. So I've recently learned that there's a short story called Rattlesnakes, which is in the You Like It Darker anthology, which was released a couple of years ago. I do have that anthology, but I haven't read it yet, so I haven't read that short story. So that's supposed to be a sequel to this in some way. So when I get around to that, I'll obviously see how it links back to Cujo, the main book. But I've also read that this somehow leads on from The Dead Zone, which was written a couple of years earlier, I think in 1979. Now, I've never read The Dead Zone yet, so I don't think I got the reference to the character from The Dead Zone that is talked about in Cujo. But essentially, when Cujo opens up the book, it talks about a tragedy that Castle Rock, Maine, where this story is set, and I think where obviously the Dead Zone must have been set, is it talks of a tragedy that the people have gone through, with basically a nutcase that was going around terrorising and attacking people. And it mentions this person by name, but because I haven't read The Dead Zone, I didn't realise that was the name of the character from The Dead Zone. So in my mind, like when I opened this, I thought it was just the opening of the book saying this town suffers some terrible luck, and we've had this mad psychopath in this town, and now we've got the next thing, which is going to be the story which is revolving around Cujo. But this character's name is also mentioned several times throughout the book, so when he is brought up, I'll sort of mention it because it sort of motivates the police officers in some respects to do their job, because they think, well, we have had some psycho here before, so maybe I should look into that. So yeah, as I said, this story is set in Castle Rock, Maine, and I suppose the main character is obviously Cujo, who is a St. Bernard. For those of you that don't know, St. Bernard is an absolutely massive dog. It was actually, it's a St. Bernard in Beethoven, the film, if you ever watched that, like 30 years ago. And they make really nice family pets. They're actually really sedate, loving dogs. I've actually met one before in the past, and while they are huge, they're quite calm, loving. But if one was to stand on its back legs, it would be taller than me once it put its paws on its shoulders, and that alone is probably enough to scare me if the dog got out of control, which obviously this dog does, or we wouldn't have a story. So one of my initial concerns before I started reading this book was that it would be written from the point of view of the dog, and I wasn't really sure I wanted to read a book from the point of view of the dog, but it's not. It's written from the point of view of quite a few characters who are overlapping with each other with their lives. And now Cujo's obviously in this, and after he becomes poorly, it sort of cuts to him a little bit and just says, you know, he's got a headache or the lights are hurting him. He doesn't want to attack so and so because he knows, you know, like they feed him or whatever. But it doesn't really go any deeper than that, and it's not like pages and pages and pages where you're looking from the point of view of a dog. So I can sort of understand how that might put some people off, because it would put me off, but that's not actually the case in this book. So yeah, we start this novel where we're talking about how this town has undergone this terrible incident with an individual who seems to have been from a previous book that Stephen King wrote. So the town is sort of trying to recover from that. And then we move on to talking about a family called the Trenton family. So we've got Vic and Donna Trenton, who've moved to Castle Rock, Maine, and they have their 4-year-old Tad Trenton. And essentially Tad has nightmares. He's sort of dreaming about something in his closet. Keeps seeing like these yellow eyes, like wolf-like eyes or something in his closet. And he keeps waking up in the night, and then he can't get back to sleep, and his mum and dad have to keep coming into his bedroom and sort of reassuring him everything's all right. Monsters can't hurt you. It's just a phase. But this sort of goes on for a little bit with Tad. So Vic sort of, he writes this poem called The Monster Words, and it's all about how like monsters can't get to Tad, and all he has to do is say this poem. And he writes it down on a piece of paper and he sticks it above Tad's bed. And throughout the book, like, Tad takes the monster words seriously. You know, if his dad's not there to put him to bed, then he'll ask his mum to tell him the words, or he'll try and say them to himself because he can sort of remember them. And he even folds them up and puts them in his pocket and takes them wherever he goes. So he's absolutely convinced there's a monster in his closet. But obviously his parents don't really believe that there's a monster in his closet. So this is the first point in the book where you're sort of thinking, is the child correct? Because obviously we're in a Stephen King novel, or are the parents correct? Now, for work, Vic works in some kind of advertising. And there's a couple of issues, because the advertising company that he sort of co-owns with somebody else had one major customer, and that customer looks like they might be about to pull the plug on working with Vic's agency. So this is going to cost him a lot of money if he can't sort this out, and they might not even be able to keep living in Castle Rock in the house that they're living in if he can't sort this issue out. So right from the start, he's really distracted with what's going on with his company and making lots of phone calls to his business partner, and they're talking about how can we retain this client that we have. Okay, now Donna has sort of become a housewife. She's not in work at this point. Tad's only 4 years old, and she's trying to kind of find, you know, her place in Maine, really. She didn't, you know, she often says, I don't want to become one of those moms that's taking part in all the PTA activities. She doesn't want to settle into that lifestyle, and she kind of feels like she's lost herself a little bit. And now Tad's going off to school, that kind of worries her a little bit more, because she doesn't have him around all day. So she's going through some stuff as well. And this is where we start to see, like, this family in itself has got some awkward dynamics going on. And as a result of her struggles, her relationship with Vic has sort of broken down a little bit, and she's actually had an extramarital affair with the local carpenter, Steve Kemp. Now, Steve Kemp does not come across as a very nice guy in this book at all, but we'll get him later, because he sort of does form a little bit part of the story towards the end of the book. But we just have to understand that the family relations in this family are a little bit complicated. Then we also follow in another family, which is the Camber family, and it's the Camber family is who Cujo the dog actually belongs to. So we have Joe Camber, who runs a garage on the outskirts of the town. So he's a mechanic, and, you know, people will bring all their stuff to him to fix. And then we have his wife Charity Camber, and then we have their son Brett Camber, and Brett is 10 years old. So Brett tries to help Joe where he can, but he's obviously still quite a young boy himself. And the dog belongs to him. And Brett has to look after Cujo, has to feed him, has to take him out for a walk, has to take full responsibility for him because Joe let him have this dog, but he said, I'm not cleaning up after the dog. Nevertheless, Joe does sort of take some responsibility at times with Cujo because he actually quite likes the dog. And as we get to know this family a little bit, Joe's actually a very unpleasant person. He's not opposed to getting his way with his wife through violence and threatening, you know, her and their son. And it would seem like Joe only really seems to like 2 or 3 people. He likes his son, but he's strict with him. He likes the dog, but I think this is because obviously the dog doesn't really say anything back to him, doesn't really cause any trouble at the start of the book. And he's also got a friend who lives just down the road called Gary Purvier, and they, you know, go out drinking together and whatever it is that Joe Campbell likes to do. Like they go off and they go to sort of strip clubs, from what I can tell, together, go out drinking together, go out fishing together, that kind of thing. So we have an issue at the Trentons where Donna's car keeps having an intermittent problem. So it's not a, oh, the car has broken down immediately and we need to take it to the nearest garage. It's like an intermittent problem, and she knows that she needs to get it fixed. And they had previously been to Joe Camber's garage about a year before when Vic's car had broken, and it had been suggested by a local that they go there, and they received good service. So Vic says to Donna, you know, why don't you take your car there to get fixed? And she said, oh, I don't really want to because it's on the outskirts, and it sort of freaked her out a bit that it's not really in the town and she doesn't really want to go out into the sticks. So she was kind of hoping that, you know, they could get something a bit closer. But because Vic has got so much on with work, he keeps forgetting to sort of arrange anything for this car. And then the car sort of will work one day and then it has an issue, or she's driving on the next day. So it's never like the, you know, we have to do something about this immediately. It's just constantly, oh, we need to get around to it, I need to get around to it, I need to get around to it. To add to Vic's worries, apart from the fact that his company might bust if he loses this client, he also finds about the affair that Donna has been having with this local Steve Kemp. And this comes about because Donna has actually ended her affair with Steve, and Steve did not take this very well. He does not like to be the person to be told, no, I don't want you. He wants to be the person that ends it with her. So it's ended before he wanted it to. So he gets quite spiteful and begins to send notes to Joe detailing the kind of things that he did to his wife to, you know, wind him up, and one assumes to split the marriage up to teach Donna a lesson that, you know, how dare she, you know, finish things with him. So he, you know, Vic at this point is like, well, my marriage is falling apart and my company's falling apart, so he's definitely not remembering to ring up Joe Camber or any other mechanic about this car. Because he has to resolve these issues with regards to his company, he then has to take a trip with his business partner, and he's supposed to be away for like 7 to 10 days. And he finds out about this affair like literally just before he's going out the door. So he talks to Donna about it, confronts her, and they have a heart-to-heart, and she admits what she's done. And she says, you know, like, I've ended it with Steve, but obviously he didn't take it very well. And they decide that while Vic is away on this business trip, that she and he will both think independently, well, they've got this time away from each other, can we save our marriage? Can we trust each other again? Is there something here to fight for? Because yes, they've got, you know, Trent, who they, Tad even, Tad, who they want to be there for him, but they still love each other, you know, and they need that time, so they're going to take that time. So Vic goes off, and he's, you know, he's heartbroken that this has happened, that his wife has had an affair, and he's also got to think about, you know, how do I save my company? So he goes off. Meanwhile, in the Camber household, Charity wants to take Brett away to go and see her sister, but Joe has never liked Charity's sister and has always sort of tried to prevent her going, flying into that state to go and see them, but they don't live in the same place as Joe and Charity. So she has to really manipulate Joe to get him to agree to let her take Brett off. He keeps saying, you know, oh, Brett needs to be here to help me with the garage. Now it's some holidays and everything. But she wants Brett to see there's a different way of living, and Charity's sister is a little bit better off financially, and I think like the place where they live has a few different choices from what choices Brett might have in Castle Rock, Maine. So she wants to expose him to that, but Joe kind of knows that, which is why he sort of fights her going. Anyway, she is quite devious and manages to get him to agree to let her take Brett away for a few days, and Joe agrees that he will stay back and he will look after Cujo and he will carry on running the business. So off she goes, like, you know. Just before they leave, Cujo is chasing after a rabbit. He's always been a really happy dog. He's a really sweet dog, never attacked anybody ever, never bitten anybody, never really growled at anybody. You know, he's just off in the field playing, chasing the rabbits. And he follows a rabbit and it goes into this rabbit hole, which he gets the front half of his body through, but he can't get the back half of his body through. And it turns out to be like an underground cave that's full of bats. And these bats have a rabies issue, and one of them ends up biting his nose. So nobody knows that he's been bitten and nobody knows that he's been poorly. And all you get from the dog's side of it is that he feels a bit thirsty, his head hurts, like he doesn't really like the light, and this sort of gets a bit worse like over a week or two, but he's still not frothing at the mouth how we would sort of imagine rabies to be at this point. That would be like a really advanced case of rabies. So there's nothing anybody can do for him. He's just going to get sicker and sicker and sicker. And there's a couple of situations where he's with his, you know, his humans, and there's like noise or light, and he feels a little bit, like, you know, I wish they'd shut up. But he sort of says to himself, you know, I don't want to bite them. He'll actually get up and leave the room so that he's not, he doesn't escalate into any kind of violence. So just before Charity and Brett go away, they sort of notice that Cujo's gone off his food a bit. He's not really eating in the morning, and he seems a bit restless and just not really like himself. So Charity's a little bit concerned that if she points this out to Brett and Joe, that they might not be able to go on their trip, and she knows that she really needs to get Brett away from Joe for a little bit. So she sort of thinks, well, hopefully it's just a one-off and he'll come round while we're away. Joe will feed him. So Joe is like none the wiser that there's actually anything wrong with Cujo at this point. So Charity and Brett go off and leave him. Joe, meanwhile, is a little bit annoyed that Charity has got her way and she's gone off with his son to go and see these people who he assumes are going to try and teach his son that, you know, Joe's not good enough and that Brett needs to, you know, be better. So he's a bit upset about that. So he calls his friend Gary, and they decide that they're going to go on a lads trip for a couple of days while Charity's off. He's just going to close the garage, and he's sort of trying to work out how he's going to feed Cujo. He's thinking, oh, should I leave him a load of food, or should I get one of the neighbours to call on him? And that's not really resolved at that point. So at this point, Gary is like packing. Joey's due to come round to his house, and Cujo has finally got to the point where his rabies is now at a point where he can't really control his impulse for violence. So he goes around Gary's house, and Gary ends up being Cujo's first victim. Cujo launches for him and rips his throat out, which is just absolutely terrifying. I mean, if you imagine the size of these dogs, imagine that coming at you. You know, and I think it's got the added fear factor here that Gary's like in his own house where he should be safe, and then this neighbour's dog comes in and brutally murders him. So Joe, meanwhile, is thinking, I'll go around to Gary's and like we'll have a couple of beers and whatnot. So he goes around to Gary's, finds Gary's dead body with his throat ripped out. He's like, that's absolutely horrific. But Cujo is still in the house, and Cujo then attacks Joe and basically does the same thing to him. So now at this point, both Joe and Gary have been Cujo's first victims, and they're lying dead in Gary's house. But nobody's looking for either of them because Charity and Brett have gone away for a few days. Gary doesn't seem to have anybody in his life other than Joe that would be looking for him, and Joe came looking for him, and now Joe's no longer there. And they're not even, because they're in Gary's house, they're not even out in public for anybody to see that anything has happened to them. So at this point, Cujo stalks off, and we assume at this point he goes back to the Canberra residence, where they've got like a big barn and the garage and the grounds and everything. So with regards to the Trentons, we've had Vic has gone off on his business trip, and Donna has been left behind with Tad. Now, her car is still having trouble, and she is thinking, I actually really need to get this sorted now because Vic's not here and my car could break down in the middle of nowhere. So she's decided that she's going to try and take it over to Joe Canberra's garage, and she's going to try and get it fixed. Now, she didn't want to take Tad with her. She did want to leave Tad with a babysitter, but Tad had a bit of a tantrum about that and said, no, Mommy, I want to be with you. So she's like, well, okay, fine, but if the car breaks down on the way, then you're going to have to walk. I can't carry you. You're getting a bit big now. So Tad agrees to this. So she packs this quite small picnic just in case, but it's nothing major, you know. I think they've got like a bottle of milk between the two of them, maybe 2 canisters of milk or something, and some olives, a few crackers, and some cucumbers. And they go out late afternoon. Now it's really, really hot. It's the middle of summer where they are in Castle Rock, Maine, so we have to sort of bear that in mind. She arrives at Joe Canberra's property, but she can't see him out, and she's like, oh, that's odd. Like, I wonder if he'll come back. So she sits waiting in the car, but he doesn't seem to come back. So she's like, okay, so the light starts to fall a little bit, and she realises that she can't get the car to restart to actually leave, so she's sort of stuck on the property. And she attempts to leave the car, but she can't because Cujo is outside and now is showing signs of rabies. Like, he's become really, really angry, and he's like drooling at the mouth, and he just wants a piece of somebody. Cujo is no longer of sane mind, so it's quite a terrifying sight. So she knows the best thing to do is they're going to lock themselves in the car, and they have to wait for Joe to return. But she doesn't know, obviously, that Joe was planning on closing the garage because she didn't call Joe beforehand to tell him that she was actually driving over there. Meanwhile, now she's stuck at the Camberwell property in her car with Tad and an angry St Bernard outside the car. Vic keeps trying to call the house to get hold of Donna, just to say goodnight to Tad and see how things are going, but he can't get hold of her, and he's beginning to get more and more worried. So, you know, night passes, she doesn't answer, and he's like, this is not like her. Something must have happened. So he calls the local sheriff to Castle Rock, and he's like, can you just send somebody around there to check on my wife, because, you know, she's not answering her phone, and that's unusual. She should be at home with my son. I'm really, really worried. She had some car trouble, so, you know, what if she's stranded somewhere? So they send the police round in the middle of the night. Now, prior to the police just arriving there, Steve Kemp, who Donna had an affair with, decided that he's going to take his revenge, sending Vic horrible letters saying what he'd done to his wife clearly wasn't enough for him. He wanted to create more trouble. So he actually broke into Vic and Donna's house after Donna had left in the car that day to go to the Camberwell residence. The Canberra residence. Camberwell, I don't know what that from. Canberra residence. So he breaks into Vic and Donna's house, and he absolutely trashes the living room, and does some horrible, horrible act in the bedroom to leave a gift on the duvet cover for them, and then writes on the wall, you know, some horrible message, and then leaves. So the house is trashed. So when the police get there, it looks like there's been some kind of home invasion. So they call Vic back, and they're like, yeah, we've got a bit of a problem here. Your son is not here. The house is absolutely trashed. Vic is obviously in a massive panic. He decides to leave his business trip early. He's like, you know, my wife and my child are far more important. So he comes home to try and sort this mess out. And, you know, he's like, you know, have you found them yet? Have you gone to look here? Have you gone to look there? And the police, they don't seem very proactive in trying to find her. They seem to be of the assumption that she may have just left him or got in a stranger with a car. in a stranger's car with her and her son if her car had broken down, because they agree that her car is not at the property, so therefore she probably wasn't at the property when the property was ransacked. But the fact is she hasn't come home. So, you know, they're like, well, you know, car probably broke, she's probably got to live with somebody else. And they don't seem to be taking Vic as seriously as you think that they should. Vic, you know, is obviously panicking because he knows that Steve Kemp is quite a nasty person and that he's got it in for Donna since she broke up with him. So he sort of confirms that he thinks that he's the man who's, you know, trashed the house. But he's concerned that Steve has his wife Donna and their son. But he also said, you know, did you go and look at the garage, which I said that she might take her car to? And they were like, oh no, we haven't done that. And they don't really think that it's a viable lead. So they're sort of sitting there thinking, well, do you know what, actually we did have that psychopath here the other summer who was going around hurting people, so maybe we just do send a car over there and just find out. And that's, you know, how that character from the Dead Zone again gets brought back into this novel, because it sort of motivates the police to think, oh, this is not a sleepy town with no crime at all. That's been proven wrong a couple of years ago with this nut job that we had. So yeah, let's just send somebody over there. But they didn't send 2 people in the police car, they only sent 1 over. Now, Vic is going out of his mind. Donna has been sat outside the Canberra residence now for it's nearly, I think it's about 2 nights she's been stuck there in the car with this dog that's essentially absolutely terrorising her and Tad. Like, they've eaten everything that they had on them, they've drank everything they've got, the sun has been extremely strong, it's been beaten down on the car, which is just making them really dehydrated. They haven't been able to open the windows because then the dog tries to get in the windows. The dog has like stove in the one door on the side of the car in its absolute rage to try and get to them, and they're both absolutely petrified. Tad has like the monster words in his pocket that his dad gave him, but it's clearly not making a difference because there really is a monster on the outside of the car like trying to get them. Donna just doesn't think that they will ever be rescued. She's sort of lost hope because she has no idea. She's now beginning to think, well, what if Joe's dead in his house or something? Nothing, you know, she just does not know how to get them out of this situation, and nobody seems to be coming. So this police officer turns up by himself, drives up, and Donna's car is there, and she sees him, she's like, amazing, we're going to get saved. The problem is the police officer gets out of the car, he's not armed, he doesn't have anybody else in the car, and immediately he's mauled by Cujo, attacked, and dies. And Donna sees this and she's like, I have absolutely no hope, we're going to die here. But she's absolutely positive that if she's going to die, she's going to save Tad. She can try and save her son. So at this point, after really having very little sleep, being extremely dehydrated, like Tad is even hallucinating in the car next to her because he's so dehydrated. She's thinking, this dog has got to be weak now. You know, he hasn't had any water, he hasn't had any food, he's just been like, you know, barking and raging, and you know, he's throbbing and blood around his face, you know, like, maybe I can take him. So after she sees the police officer die, she thinks, right, now's as good the time as any. If I wait much longer, I'm going to be too weak to do this. And she picks a baseball bat up off the grass and then beats Cujo to death with it, which is just an absolutely awful scene, because imagine having to beat a dog to death. Now obviously she's doing it in self-defense, she's in a red rage, she wants to save her son. She's obviously not thinking about it in the same way that we are, but you also have to ask yourself, obviously, if you were in the same position as her, you would do whatever it needed to be done to save your life and to save the life of your 4-year-old child that's like trapped in your car and will need water immediately. So yeah, it's just an absolutely horrible scene. Like the way that it's described, you know, the suspense is there. You want Donna to succeed, but at the same time you also don't want Cujo to die. But then you also know that there's nothing to save Cujo. Like, you can't cure the rabies that he's had. So it's just an all-round absolutely awful scene. because you don't want any of them to die, but essentially somebody's got to. So Cujo gives his best, obviously bites Donna in the process of doing this. So you're also thinking, oh, now she's going to get rabies. Will she be able to be helped? Can they cure it in humans if they get a bit early enough? She essentially beats Cujo. She wins. And she's in the process basically of beating the dog to death. Like, she can't even stop after the dog stop moving. She's just so full of adrenaline, like, oh my god, you know. And Vic decided that he was sick of waiting for the police to get around to doing anything. The police officer that had said he was going to go and look for her at the Canberra residence and never called back or anything, you know. So the other police were like, well, yeah, everything was probably fine then if he didn't call back. And Vic's like, why is nobody communicating with me? I'm just going to drive over there and see for myself. So now he turns up in a car, and he's met with a scene where there's a dead mauled police officer on the floor. His wife is beating a dog to death that's already dead, and she's covered in blood as well because she's been attacked. The car looks a mess because obviously the dog had run into the door, and obviously his son is there. And the absolute tragedy of this is that when they get Tad out the car, he has died. He's already died of dehydration. So he didn't die because the dog bit him. He died because of the conditions that he was in while he was waiting to be rescued. And it's just absolutely heartbreaking. So Donna refuses to believe that he's dead. You know, she's like, no, I've been through so much. I've come so far. You know, he can't be. She can't let it go. So it's really hard to get the ambulance to take him off, like to let her take them off. And then obviously she needs assistance herself because she's been bitten and will need urgent shots essentially so that she doesn't get some untreatable version of rabies. And you know, Vic is like, before I went on holiday, you know, he thought he was going to lose his business and he thought his marriage might break down. He's gone away for a couple of days. He's had to leave his business deal earlier. At this point, he doesn't know. He may have lost his business. He thinks he probably has. And now his son has died and his wife might potentially get, you know, ill from rabies and die herself. And there's been this awful, awful scene where, you know, several other people have obviously died further on down the road by the dog as well. So it's just an absolute tragedy. And I think that what really, there's several aspects to this story I think that gets me, which is why it is to me the most scary Stephen King novel that I've read so far. It's one, the idea of a dog turning bad like that, because, you know, dogs are animals. Like, we've trained them, you know, to be nice and friendly and sit in the home with us and be our family pets. So we trust them. But you know, something like rabies is something that could happen. Like, you know, Cujo just essentially was playing and got accidentally bit by something and nobody noticed. And all of a sudden this big, dopey, lovable family friend suddenly turns into a mean killing machine that is like unstoppable, and because of his size as well, like that just makes it even more terrifying, I think. So from my point of view, I think that that could actually happen. So that's one of the things that I find absolutely petrifying about it. Number two, when I think about if you were trapped in a vehicle like that in this searing heat, unable to get away from the heat, and had been attacked by this dog that just wouldn't let up. Because, you know, it's not like the dog was going to go off and find water or food. It had gone like past that because it was so poorly. Actually says when you're in Cujo's sort of head, you know, that he's not thirsty anymore or anything like that. So the very idea of sitting there for like 48 hours or more, you know, and praying that somebody would come along and help you, and it just seeming to be absolutely hopeless, and you can see, you know, your child dying and yourself, you know, losing life because, you know, you've got no water, you don't have the basics that you need to survive. It just sounds absolutely awful to me. And then at the last minute, you know, when this police officer turns up, and the hope that she must have felt, thinking, oh, you know what, finally we're saved, and then watching him be killed right in front of you, and there's nothing else, that's it. You know, again, I just think that there's so many aspects to it that I find more terrifying than maybe the vampires in Salem's Lot or resurrected animals in Pet Cemetery, because I just feel like there's a lot about this book, you know, that it's not supernatural or paranormal like a lot of Stephen King's horrors seem to go. Like, this could genuinely happen, and I think that's why I would class it so far as the scariest one that I've ever read. Now, apologies through the video if I've said the names a little bit wrong. I think I said Camberwell for a bit instead of Camber, and I think I might have called Tad Trent a couple of times during that. I actually film these all in one go, and I don't write a script before I start. I just talk about the book as I remember it. So yeah, apologies if I've made any mistakes, but I am very passionate about this book. I was very keen to talk about it for a video, and I'm really keen to find out what any of the rest of you think about this book, because I've got to be honest, I feel like it's underrated. I don't see it in the top of people's ratings very often. Most people just seem to like rate it okay, whereas I'm like, no, that was scary, that was thrilling. I think it's considered like one of his classics in the Ultimate Storyteller collection. So yeah, let me know, what do you think? How does it rate for you on the fear factor scale out of all the Stephen King books that you've read? Have you read anything? If you do find Cujo scary, is there anything else that you find scarier than Cujo? Because I'm kind of thinking how you find the horror might sort of depend on what tweaks your fear. So for me, it's sort of clearly more like some realistic aspects of it is going to tweak my fear, rather than more supernatural elements, which obviously I don't think could really happen. So it's good to know, because if you find that scary, then there might be another one that I haven't yet read that you think is going to also make me scared. But it's a great read. I'd rate Cujo a 5. I couldn't find any reason to rate it down from a 5, because it fully delivers on the, you know, horror scale. And I think that it's also really complex with all the different relationships going on between all the residents in the town and the two families. I think it's like just written really well. All the characters are written really well, and I think that the ending was really good as well. It's obviously not the ending that we would want, but I think it was an ending that was inevitable, and one that was probably going to be what had to be that. Probably couldn't be anything different really. Because I don't think you can cure rabies when it gets to that tragic state that Cujo was in at the end. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will look forward to doing the next summary with you soon. Bye!